Welcome back, everyone. Conversation continues on the program. It's a notorious fact that disaster is on the increase in Nigeria, and not only Nigeria, across the world. Now, one cannot forget the Amazon rain, fire forest that's occurred recently. Now, some months back in Lagos State, we had some houses, falling off. Here in Ibadan, there was a similar occurrence. And of course, over the weekend, the same thing happened in Lagos State. And all around, flood disaster in Ibadan. Last week, about 5 persons were reported to have been swept away by flood. And you keep wondering what's happening. And so it means that there is the need for us to reduce disaster. And so yesterday, on Sunday, the 13th day of October 2019, there was the commemoration of the 2019 International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction. We must, do everything possible to reduce risk in our society and in our environment. So we want to look at how we can reduce risk. Since it's a natural thing, all we can do is to either prevent or forestall, an occurrence. So we have joining us to talk about this, the Executive Director, Center for Disaster and Risk Reduction. I call him Gallant Kola Amzat. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning.
It's great to have you here.
Yeah,
Let's actually look at the aftermath of when disasters happened. I'm actually going to be taking us to the IDPs now in the northern part of the country itself. I was actually looking at the headlines this morning, and I was seeing several billions of naira have been spent on IDPs in Nigeria. And of course, in spite of this several billions of naira, the newspaper said, for instance, there is still gloom. There is still bleakness. It means that there could be outbreak of diseases. It means that more life could be lost at the IDPs, which the IDP is trying to prevent itself. If you look at all of these instances, how do we begin to manage the issue of corruption and handling disaster itself in the country in the aftermath of it?
Yeah, thank you. I would have preferred we begin with proactive disaster risk management rather than being reactive. Because in this part of the world, we have always been reactive, and that is why serious attention.
What do you mean by reactive?
Yeah, reactive is we wait for disaster to happen, and in some other climes they don't do that. They are proactive in their management of disaster risk, and like I said, that is why attention has been so focused on IDP issues, money pumped in that direction, and yet nothing really has happened to
maybe because in this part of the world we believe that all disasters are natural. None of them are man-made.
But they are not. If we have to go down through what makes up a disaster, when we look at hazards that trigger disasters, they can either be human-induced or nature-induced.
Okay.
So concentration only on nature-induced hazards that trigger disasters may be a mistake on our part, because there is no natural hazards that would not have human effects.
Even the volcanic eruption?
Of course, we don't experience that here.
There was earth tremor in Shaki some time ago.
Yeah.
But the fact is that you are a disaster management expert. For instance, if you look at all of these instances, how do we, because there is bound to be disasters, whether it's man-made or it's natural, but how prepared is the Nigerian environment and how sincere are they? Because we always look at aftermath. Like the US, for instance, will not tell us that they are not prepared for a hurricane, even though sometimes it disrupts, it lays some people off their homes. But there is always an adequate preparation to take care of people who've been affected. But if you come down to Nigeria, you hear several billions of naira, NGOs saying they have acquired several monies to take care of IDPs. Even if you look at the budget itself, you see that water supply and some of these emergency sites that have been located for people displaced, you will hear them and you begin to marvel what is going on. When we have instances like this, beyond the expertise, you should also have an overview of what should be done in terms of dealing with people who've been displaced here.
Our preparedness level is very low. There's no doubt about that. And like I keep saying everywhere, every opportunity I have, that we are Nigerians in Nigeria. And what does that suffices to mean? It means that an average Nigerian, let us search ourselves in whatever we are doing. Are we doing it with all honesty? So if we hear the effect of the lump sum expended on the management of IDPs would bring results, but because of that dishonesty in discharge of our responsibilities is the aftermath of what we are experiencing in the management of IDPs. People that handle affairs there, are they doing it with all honesty? When they have to retrofit, are they retrofitting with honesty? When they
what is your organization doing? What do they do? What do you, beyond just manage risk itself, what other things you also monitor?
I don't think you know what managing risk exactly means.
Okay.
It has phases.
Okay.
There is the preventive phase. That is making sure hazards don't trigger disaster at all.
Do you have the facilities to do that? Do you monitor? Because I know in other climes they could monitor that in the next 2 hours, this particular area is going to be blown off by an hurricane. People should be evacuated. Do you have the necessary facilities here?
Well, I work for a non-governmental organization. Funding has been a serious challenge to many of us in that sector. But we have government agencies that
are saddled with responsibility.
Yes, that are saddled with responsibility
Mr.
of management.
You know, you said something which I want us to take one after the other.
All right.
You did say that in Nigeria we are more reactionary than being, preventive.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about how we can be preventive. We've seen flood disaster.
Yeah.
I'm talking about just last week here, about 5 persons were reportedly swept away by flood. How can we prevent it? Now, rain must fall. Now, we've seen houses collapse in Ibadan here, and getting excavators down there took some hours and all that. Now, the IDP camps were constructed only when the insurgents are struck in their areas. So how can we, looking at these 3 instances cited, how can we be preventive rather than being reactionary?
Yeah, we can be. It's not impossible. We just need to hype our preparedness activities. 1, do we have adequate plan prior a disaster? And what are these plans? Not many states in this country have what we call a contingency plan. So if you don't have a contingency plan, anytime a disaster strikes, you will be running helter-skelter.
Part of this, as I was asking you about equipment now, when you talk about all of this contingency and exigency as the case may be, do you even have the facilities to actually detect, to say that there is a risk factor? For instance, in some, let's say Eleyele, for instance, that in the next 2 hours, people should begin to evacuate some part of that community or a particular environment. Do you even have the test tool to actually detect, to actually have a radar to say that, okay, somewhere in Lagos, there's something that is going to happen? Do you have all of this? And how much more do you work with the government agencies? Are they even viable?
Well, you are already taking me into one of the priorities of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, and that is priority 1, that talks about understanding risk. Because there is no way you manage a risk
if you don't
understand the risk. Coming to how we work, of course, we work with many of the statutory agencies that manage disasters in the country. But like I said earlier on, funding has been a serious challenge to many of us that are non-state actors. But we have state agencies that have statutory allocation to manage disasters. So all these equipment,
Are they doing enough? Do they have the equipment? Even when you say they have the funding to do that.
they are trying their best possible. We are not there yet, but we are moving. We are not stagnant. So where one would expect them to be.
What are the success story when you say you're not stagnant here?
Of course.
Beyond relief, because what we've been seeing is relief. I've not heard instances where there is a red alert to say people should leave a particular place because a disaster is about to happen in Nigeria, not even in Oyo State.
Yeah,
Let's not see Oyo
State. That's why I
here.
said I would have preferred we started from being proactive than reactive. When I say being proactive, it means we must invest more in what we call disaster risk reduction. And what does that imply? One, equip statutory agencies like the SEMAs in many states, like NEMA in Nigeria. It will be funny to say that the structure that manages disaster in Nigeria are at 3 levels. NEMA at the federal level, SEMAs at the state level, and what should be local emergency management committees at the local level, local governments.
You know, when we talk
so
of...
all these are not there.
When we talk
so
of...
if the structure is not there, so where will the equipment go to?
You know, most
Who
times,
funds what?
most times, Mr. Hamzat, we blame the government.
Yeah.
Before even talking about the government, I want us to look at some of our habits and attitudes. You know, I've been told that when I take a sachet of pure water and I throw it on waterways, that means I'm not preventing risk. So let's talk about, perhaps talking of NEMA and all that, we're going to be talking about billions and millions of naira. What are the habits of people that they need to, households now, that needs to change? What are the things people do that constitute risk which they do not know before we even begin to call out the government?
Yes, there are many practices among our people. What we are celebrating is International Day for Disaster Reduction, and the focus from its inception in 1989 is to build a culture of risk reduction.
Okay.
And that starts from every individual, every household, every home. In every household, we should find a period, probably within a week or any time convenient, to discuss about what constitutes risk within our household, among the community. And we should ensure that we implement whatever we have agreed that may constitute a risk. Let us look at the issue of environmental sanitation in this part of the world. People take it with levity. After enjoying your sachet of pure water, you drop anywhere. Plastic, we know what it means today. There is this saying that if we don't remove plastics on our drains, on our rivers and seas, we're going to be in trouble very soon. So these habits, look at issue of flood. There are, as we are talking now, there are still many houses on flood plains.
So you are indirectly talking about the adverse effect of climate change, which is a global phenomenon.
Of course,
it's
yes.
a global problem. But let me come down to the issue of infrastructural systems. Do you also do sensitization to builders, to society of engineers who actually construct these buildings, because the weather is changing, and of course some of the activities of man has been causing a lot of changes in the natural habitat itself? Do you do sensitization as to the kind of buildings that can sustain every weather?
Of course we do. Of course we do. Like my own organization, in the recent past, I've moved around markets in Oyo State to sensitize the market users on risk issues.
What exactly did you point out to them at the market?
Market one, the way they use their stores. You see a woman that is using a grinding machine,
Okay.
keeping fuel right in the store. That is a risk habit. You see the way they dispose their the sanitation in the market. We also discuss that too. These are risk issues, and the habits of keeping people, allowing them to use the market overnight, which of course they are not the owners of the stores. They may not know what are inside.
Let me seize this opportunity to even ask you this.
Right.
At home,
Yeah.
now, just last week, I saw a picture on the social media of a particular vehicle who, was caught up in flames because gas, a cylinder full of gas was kept inside the car. And after some time, the gas exploded and got the car not burnt, but of course, somehow the roof was cut off and all that. Now, I've heard of people saying you don't make use of, telephone set when you are beside, in
This we do here is keeping our cylinders in the kitchen. It should
Is
not,
it wrong?
Very, 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 because any little leak from the cylinder might trigger, even when you don't scratch much, it can trigger a fire disaster. So the practice is keep your cylinder outside your kitchen.
Let's look at the theme for this year. And of course, this write-up said the theme of this year's International Day for DRR is reducing disaster damage to critical infrastructure and limiting the disruption of basic services. Some of these critical infrastructures are hospitals and schools. Now, do we have disaster-prone hospitals? Let's even come down to your state, for instance. Let's not go too far. Do we have disaster-prone hospital facilities? When disaster happens, where do we go to?
Yeah, that is why the theme is on the focus D, that all these critical facilities, we should ensure that they are risk informed, so that because we know the implications.
Just informed now. What happens to facilities?
Of course,
Can they take care in terms of beds now for people who could fall casualty here?
Of course, if it is risk informed, it means you are going to comply with every standards, so that disaster will not affect them. Because when disaster strikes, where do you run to? The first target has always been schools for IDPs. So what happens to learning, the students, education, so to say? And outside that, you run to hospitals. So how do you now cope when hospitals that should be safe? In 2007 or 8, the team was keeping hospitals safe because of the fact that that facility must be kept safe at all time, because whenever a disaster strike, that is where you take casualties to or survivors. So if such facility is not safe, you know what that means.
We need to wrap up, but before we go, something happened in Lagos State some time ago. The Third Mainland Bridge was closed for repairs. I'm just wondering, I was discussing with some persons, I've known some overhead bridge in Oyo State, in Ibadan here, since the late 80s and all of that, and I can't remember when last some of these bridges were shut down for repair works. Is it that the topography here encourages that we don't check our bridges and all of that? So what happens? What's the organization doing to call government attention to issues like these?
Well, we are trying our best possible, because we are stakeholders, especially when it comes to disaster risk management. If we notice any of the infrastructures.
We'll actually take that as your parting word because we're actually out of time. Lagos studio is itching to be on right now.
Okay.
Thank you so much for being here. We've been speaking to Kola Hamzat, and of course, Executive Director for Center for Disaster and Risk Reduction. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for your time.
And of course, it's over to our Lagos studio now. For me, Badon, I am Bolabo, Famous School. Do have a pleasant day.
And I am Anulu Akbo Morinde. Enjoy your day.